There's a silent lie that almost everyone carries without realizing it, and it begins the moment you look at a productive person and feel that strange mix of admiration and helplessness. Admiration for what they achieve. Helplessness because, deep down, a voice whispers, "She is different from me." That voice isn't truth, it's self-sabotage disguised as lucidity. What you see when you observe someone disciplined isn't the complete picture. You're seeing the end result of an invisible process, an inner journey that happened out of sight, and drawing completely wrong conclusions about what generated that result. It's like watching a magician pull a rabbit out of a hat and concluding that he has supernatural powers, when, in fact, the rabbit was there all along, masterfully positioned. Misdirected admiration doesn't inspire, it paralyzes. It creates an imaginary distance between who you are today and who you could be, blocking your potential before you even take the first step. And the cruelest part is that this distance doesn't exist in the real world. It only exists in your mind. This blockage has a name. It's called the myth of born with willpower, the belief that certain people are born with a special gift, an infinite reserve of self-control that allows them to do what others cannot. Have you ever heard someone say, "I have no discipliniers," if confessing to a permanent flaw, something inscribed in the immutable, forever? This idea is repeated so frequently that it has become a collective truth, and the most dangerous thing is not believing it once, it's transforming it into an identity. When someone says that's the way I am essentially, this is like closing a door and throwing away the key, abdicating one's own growth before even trying. Modern neuroscience has clearly demonstrated that self-control is not a fixed personality trait, it's a skill, a capacity that responds to training, structure, and awareness of how the mind works. Michael Jordan wasn't born the best. Kobe Bryant woke up at 4 a.m, not because he had more willpower than others, but because he had built a mindset and a system that made this behavior almost automatic. The difference between them and most wasn't genetic, it was method. And here is the main conflict that very few people stop to see with sufficient mental clarity. The problem was never a lack of willpower. The problem was that no one taught the right way. From an early age, society presents self-discipline as a matter of moral character. Either you have it or you don't. Those who strive are praised as virtuous. Those who fail are seen as weak, without purpose, without commitment. This judgment creates enormous pressure, and pressure without direction does not produce personal growth, it produces anxiety. The person tries, fails, tries again with more emotional intensity, fails again. And with each cycle, the narrative that I am not capable creeps in like a root that grows silently, undermining inner balance and distorting self-image. What no one tells you is that truly consistent people don't rely on willpower all the time. They've built something far more powerful, something that works on bad days, when motivation is gone, when exhaustion knocks at the door. And understanding what that something is completely transforms your journey. But before getting there, you need to understand something that happens silently inside you every day. Something that evolution programmed with astonishing precision, and that works against your awakening every time you try to change a behavior, create a new habit, or expand your potential. It's not weakness, it's not lack of intention, it's biology. It's your own brain, doing exactly what it was designed to do, and understanding this mechanism with true self-knowledge is the first step to stop fighting against it and start using it as a tool for inner transformation in your favor. There's something happening inside you right now that you've probably never stopped to observe consciously. Your brain, that extraordinary organ that processes millions of pieces of information per second, has an absolute priority that was ingrained in it thousands of years ago, long before goals, routines, or any concept of productivity existed. This priority is simple and brutal: save energy. Throughout most of human history, the unnecessary expenditure of energy could mean the difference between survival and death. The person who rested when they could was, in fact, preparing for the next challenge. The brain learned this so well that it transformed the economy of effort into a deep, almost irresistible instinct. And the problem is that this instinct, once essential for survival, has now become one of the greatest obstacles to your personal evolution. You are not lazy, you are human, and your brain is doing exactly what it was programmed to do, only in a world completely different from the one it was designed for. Understanding this mechanism through self-awareness is what separates those who remain stuck in the same patterns from those who truly progress on their journey. The brain has a region called the limbic system, the oldest and most instinctive part of the mind that responds to effort as if it were a threat. Every time you try to create a new habit, start a difficult task, or step out of your comfort zone, this part of the brain triggers a resistance signal. That's why you open your phone when you should be working. That's why you postpone the gym until tomorrow. That's why you start a transformative book and stop on the third page. It's not a lack of purpose, it's your nervous system trying to protect you from an effort it doesn't yet recognize as safe or rewarding. Neuroscientist Andrew Huberman describes this process clearly. The human brain is essentially friction-averse, and any behavior that requires more energy than usual will be naturally avoided unless there is a conscious redesign of the environment and mental triggers. This is not weakness, it's neural physics. And here lies the true reason for procrastination. Not the superficial version most people know, but the deep root that mental clarity reveals. Procrastination is not laziness. It's your brain automatically and unconsciously choosing the path of least resistance. When a task seems too big, too vague, or too uncomfortable, the nervous system doesn't assess the future value of that action, it only assesses the immediate cost. And the immediate cost of doing something always seems greater than the immediate cost of postponing it. It's an illusion, of course, but it's an extremely convincing illusion. James Clear, author of the book Atomic Habits, essential reading for anyone on this journey of inner transformation, explains that the brain is optimized for immediate rewards, not future rewards. This means that without a conscious mindset strategy, you will always feel more inclined to do what is easy now than what is important later. And it is precisely this trap that keeps most people stagnant, repeating the same patterns year after year without understanding why. But here's the point that changes everything. If your brain was programmed to conserve energy, that means it can also be reprogrammed to find energy where there was only resistance before. Human potential isn't limited by biology, it's limited by what you don't yet know about how your own mind works. And when you begin to see the brain not as an enemy, but as an ally that needs to be guided with intention and intelligence, something begins to stir within. A spark of self-knowledge that, when properly nurtured, has the power to completely rewrite your story. But before talking about how to reprogram this mind, it's necessary to understand why the solution you've probably already tried, the one that promises transformation in 24 hours, never really worked. Have you ever felt that powerful sensation after watching a motivational video? That fire that ignites in your chest? That absolute certainty that this time it will be different? That your journey of inner transformation begins now? That nothing will stop you? It's a real feeling. Genuine. The problem isn't the feeling itself. The problem is what happens to it in the following hours. Because that fire, however intense it may seem, has a surprisingly short duration. Research in behavioral neuroscience shows that the dopamine peak generated by motivational content lasts, on average, between 2 and 4 hours. After that, the brain returns to its baseline state, reality knocks on the door, and that vibrant energy begins to dissipate like smoke. And then comes the question that hurts: why can't I keep this up? The answer is uncomfortable, but liberating, because motivation was never meant to last. It's a trigger, not fuel. And confusing the two is the mistake that keeps millions of people trapped in a silent cycle of enthusiasm and disappointment, never achieving the balance and consistency they so desperately seek. This cycle has such a predictable structure that once you learn to recognize it, you'll start seeing it everywhere, in yourself, in the people around you, on social media. It begins with motivation, a video, a book, an inspiring conversation, a moment of mental clarity that makes everything seem possible. Then comes the action. You start going to the gym, open your goal notebook, reorganize your routine, feel like you're finally on the right track. And then, inevitably, comes the relapse, not for lack of purpose, but because the action was built on an unstable emotional foundation, and emotions, by nature, are temporary. The author Ryan Holiday, in his book The Ego is Your Enemy It, accurately describes how the euphoria of the beginning often sabotages long-term progress because it creates the illusion that feeling is the same as doing, and that the intensity of desire is in itself a form of achievement. But the brain doesn't evolve through intensity. It evolves through repetition. And repetition doesn't depend on how you're feeling. It depends on what you've structured yourself to do regardless of how you're feeling. The motivation industry understood something long before you did. Emotion sells. And it sells well. High-impact speeches, videos with epic soundtracks, powerful phrases about awakening and potential. All of this is designed to generate an immediate emotional peak, because emotional peaks generate engagement, and engagement generates revenue. There's not necessarily bad intention in this, but there's a huge structural problem. When the product being sold is the feeling of motivation, and not the real building of mindset and self-discipline, the client needs to keep coming back. They need another video, another course, another retreat, another dose of enthusiasm to feel capable of acting. It's a model of emotional dependence disguised as personal growth. And the clearest sign that you've fallen into this trap is simple. If you need to feel motivated to act, you haven't yet built a real system. Truly productive people don't wait for the perfect intention. They've created the conditions to act even when the intention hasn't appeared. And this is exactly where the turning point begins, when you stop looking for motivation and start looking for structure. When you understand that self-sabotage isn't overcome with more enthusiasm, it's overcome with less emotional dependence and more behavioral architecture. There's a secret that consistent people have discovered, and it's not in any motivational video. It's in a much quieter, much deeper, and much more powerful place than any dopamine rush you've ever felt. If you could spend an entire day observing the routine of a truly productive person, you would probably be surprised by what you wouldn't find. You wouldn't find explosive motivation in the morning. You wouldn't find fiery internal speeches about purpose and potential before each task. You wouldn't find superhuman willpower heroically resisting every distraction. What you would find is something much simpler, much quieter, and, paradoxically, much more powerful. Systems routines built with intention, environments designed with awareness, decisions eliminated before they even need to be made. Consistent people aren't more disciplined than you in the emotional sense of the word. They've simply stopped relying on emotion to act. They understood at some point in their journey that true self-discipline isn't about fighting against yourself every day. It's about building a life where the right behavior becomes the easiest path to follow. That's the invisible difference that no one sees from the outside, but that explains everything. The distinction between systems and goals is one of the most transformative concepts in the field of self-knowledge and personal development, yet it is one of the least understood. A goal is a destination. A system is the road. Most people spend their entire lives obsessed with the destination, losing 10 pounds, earning more money, being more productive, without ever building the road that leads there. And the problem with isolated goals is that they create a binary and cruel relationship with success. Either you arrive or you fail. There is no middle ground. There is no recognition of the process. There is no mental clarity about real progress. James Clear, In Atomic Habits, this is illustrated with surgical precision. Two athletes may have the same goal of winning a marathon, but only the one who has built a consistent training system will achieve it. The goal doesn't separate them, the system does. And this applies to every area of your life in an equally profound way. But there's a third element that consistent people master, and that's rarely mentioned: the elimination of unnecessary decisions. Every decision you make throughout the day consumes mental energy that could be directed toward what truly matters on your journey of inner transformation. This even has a scientific name: decision fatigue. Barack Obama wore the same type of clothes every day to avoid wasting mental energy on trivial choices. Steve Jobs did the same, not because they were eccentric, but because they understood that focus is a finite resource, and that protecting it is a way to honor one's own potential. Productive people automate as much as possible. The wake-up time isn't negotiated every morning. The workout isn't decided on the day. Meals aren't improvised when hunger strikes. Every anticipated decision is a silent victory over self-sabotage, a form of balance, built not with brute force, but with strategic intelligence applied to daily life. And here's the point that few people manage to grasp in depth. Building systems isn't a matter of superficial organization. It's a profound act of self-knowledge. It's you saying to yourself, I know how my mind works. I know where it falters. And I will build a path that protects it from its own traps. This is applied awareness. This is awakening in the form of daily practice. But there is an external factor that silently sabotages even the best systems, a factor that is all around you now, shaping your thoughts, your impulses, and your choices without you realizing it. And when you understand the power it has over your life, you will never look at your environment the same way again. There is a force acting upon you every day, silently, with a precision that no form of conscious self-sabotage can match. It doesn't need to convince you of anything. It doesn't need to argue, seduce, or threaten. It simply exists around you, and its constant presence shapes your thoughts, impulses, and choices so subtly that you rarely realize you are being influenced. This force is called the environment, and the level of awareness most people have about the power of the environment in their lives is frighteningly low. Psychologist Richard Thaler, winner of the Nobel Prize in Economics, developed a concept called choice architecture. The idea that the physical and social context in which a decision is made influences the outcome of that decision as significantly as the person's own will. In other words, you don't make decisions in a vacuum. You make decisions within an environment that is already silently pushing you in a certain direction. The question is, did you intentionally design this environment, or did you simply accept what was there? Think about the objects that surround you right now. The cell phone on the table. The television on the bedroom wall. The sofa positioned directly in front of the screen. The refrigerator left open out of habit at 10 o'clock at night. Each of these elements is a trigger, a signal that your brain has learned to associate with a specific behavior. And when these triggers are present, the behavior they activate becomes almost automatic, regardless of your conscious intention at that moment. This is what neuroscientists call context-induced behavior, and it explains why you can stay focused in a quiet cafe, but not in your own room, why you eat more when the plate is larger, why you procrastinate more when your cell phone is in sight. Your environment is not neutral. It is constantly communicating with your nervous system, activating patterns, creating impulses, shaping your mental frequency without asking permission. And most people spend their entire lives reacting to these signals without ever questioning where they come from. Practical examples of this in everyday life are so simple, they're almost disconcerting. If you want to develop the habit of reading before bed, placing the book on your pillow is more effective than any amount of willpower. If you want to eat more balanced meals, rearranging your refrigerator so that fruits are at eye level reduces consumption of ultra-processed foods by up to 40%, according to studies on eating behavior. If you want to work out in the morning, leaving your sneakers by your bed the night before eliminates one of the biggest barriers to this behavior, making the decision at a time of lowest energy. These adjustments seem too small to make a difference. But it is precisely this perception that keeps people stuck. The idea that inner transformation needs to be dramatic to be real. The mental clarity that comes from a well-designed environment is silent, but its effects are profound and lasting. Every element of your physical space is a message you are sending to your own mind about who you are and how you act. And here is the invitation that this knowledge brings. Look around you now with new eyes. With awareness, with the genuine question, was this environment designed to elevate me or to keep me where I am? Because redesigning your external space is one of the most powerful and underrated ways to redesign your internal space. When the environment works in your favor, self-discipline ceases to be a daily battle and begins to become the natural path. But there is an even more precise strategy to make this process inevitable, a way to build habits that don't depend on motivation, don't depend on willpower, and that make the desired behavior so easy that the only real option is to keep going. There's a principle that the world's most productive people apply almost universally, and it rarely appears in superficial content about habits and self-discipline. This principle isn't about motivation. It's not about waking up earlier or having a perfect morning. It's about something much more strategic and profound. Reduce the friction between you and the behavior you want to have. Friction, in this context, is any obstacle, physical, mental, or emotional, that exists between your intention and your action. And what behavioral neuroscience has discovered is that most people don't fail in their habits due to a lack of purpose or mental clarity. They fail because the path between intention and action is full of small obstacles that individually seem insignificant, but collectively create enough resistance to make the brain choose the easiest path. Every extra second you take to start a task is an open window for self-sabotage to enter, and closing those windows is one of the most powerful practices for inner transformation that exists. Making desired behavior inevitable is an art that combines self-awareness with intentional life design, and it begins with a simple yet powerful question. What is making this habit difficult to maintain? If you want to meditate every day but need to find the app, put on your headphones, find a quiet place, and decide how long to meditate, each of these steps is a point of friction. Eliminate them. Leave the app open on the screen, the headphones on the table, the space already prepared, the timer already set. Now the only real effort is to sit down and close your eyes. This logic applies to any habit you want to build on your journey of personal growth. Want to write every day? Leave your notebook open to a blank page on your desk. Want to work out in the morning? Sleep in your workout clothes. Want to read more? Leave the book where you normally pick up your phone. These adjustments seem ridiculously simple, and that's exactly why they work. The brain doesn't resist what is easy. The rule of preparing everything beforehand is, in practice, a way of having a conversation with your future self. When you prepare the environment the night before, you are essentially saying to your future self, I've already made this decision for you. Now you just need to follow it. This eliminates decision fatigue during periods of lowest energy, which are usually precisely when habits are tested. Chef and writer Tim Ferriss calls this set up, a concept from professional cooking that means having all the ingredients prepared and positioned before you start cooking. Applied to life, it means that preparation is not a secondary detail. It is a central part of the process. People who live with this intention don't wake up improvising their routine. They wake up executing a plan that has already been consciously designed, and this frees up a huge amount of mental energy for what really matters during the day. But there's an even deeper layer to this process that goes beyond logistics and touches directly on your inner frequency. When you start building these dead-end paths, these systems that make the right behavior almost inevitable, you're sending a powerful message to your own mind about who you're becoming. Every small adjustment in the environment, is a vote in the direction of your new identity. And these votes accumulate. They add up. They create a silent momentum that, over time, transforms into something most people never experience. The feeling that discipline has ceased to be an effort and has become a natural expression of who you are. And speaking of accumulation, there's a specific phenomenon that happens when small actions are repeated consistently, and its effect on human potential is far more powerful than any sudden major change you've ever tried to make. There's a collective illusion that silently sabotages the inner transformation journey of millions of people, and it's hidden within something that seems, at first glance, completely rational. It's the belief that big changes require big actions. That to transform your life, you need a radical turnaround, a strict diet, a completely new routine, a monumental commitment that rewrites everything at once. And this belief is exactly what makes most people give up before they get anywhere. Because sudden, big changes clash head-on with how the brain works. They demand a level of effort that the nervous system perceives as a threat, activating all the resistance mechanisms discussed earlier. Self-sabotage doesn't need to be dramatic to be effective, it just needs to make the cost seem greater than the reward. And when you try to change everything at once, the cost will always seem immense. The mental clarity that leads to real progress doesn't come from intensity, it comes from consistency, applied in doses that the brain can accept and repeat. The compound effect of micro-habits is one of the most underrated yet most powerful concepts in the field of self-knowledge and personal development. The idea is simple. Small actions performed consistently over time produce exponentially greater results than large actions performed sporadically. James Clear demonstrates this with elegant mathematics in Atomic Habits. If you improve just 1% a day for a year, you become 37 times better by the end of that period. 37 times. Starting from 1% daily. That's not motivation, it's math. And it reveals something profound about how human potential truly expands, not in dramatic leaps, but in silent layers that accumulate with a patience most people simply don't have because they've never learned to value the process. Meditating for 5 minutes a day seems insignificant, but 5 minutes a day for a year is more than 30 hours of contemplative practice, 30 hours of expanded awareness, of built balance, of elevated inner frequency. And here's what happens in the brain when you start consistently recording small victories, and it changes everything. Every time you complete a habit, however small, the brain releases a small dose of dopamine, not the artificial fleeting dopamine of motivational videos, but functional dopamine associated with real achievement. Over time, the brain begins to associate the behavior itself, and not just the end result, with reward. This creates a virtuous cycle where the action becomes increasingly attractive and resistance becomes less and less. Neuroscientist Andrew Huberman describes this process as one of the most reliable mechanisms for building a long-term mindset. When progress becomes visible, even if small, the brain's reward system begins to work in favor of your intention, not against it. That's why checking completed tasks off a list, recording consecutive days of a habit, or simply internally acknowledging that you did what you promised yourself has a real neurological impact on your journey. But there's a subtle mistake that appears precisely at this point in the journey, when progress begins to show, and that destroys the advancement of almost everyone who gets this far. It's a mistake that has nothing to do with laziness or lack of purpose. It has to do with where you're placing your focus, with what you're using as a measure of success, and with a silent obsession that, disguised as ambition, corrodes from within everything you've built with such care. Understanding this mistake is the difference between people who move forward and people who are eternally starting over. There's a question that the world's most productive people answer completely differently from most, and that difference explains almost everything. The question is, how do you manage to do difficult things with such consistency? The answer most people expect to hear involves sacrifice, suffering, heroic resistance to discomfort. But the real answer is far more surprising and, in a way, more liberating. They made the difficult enjoyable, not by pretending it's easy, not by denying the effort, but by creating mental and emotional associations that transform the experience of effort into something the brain seeks out, not avoids. This isn't self-deception, it's applied neuroscience with intention. It's self-knowledge used as a tool for expansion. And when you understand how this mechanism works, you realize that the line between discipline and pleasure is much thinner than it seems, and that crossing it is far more within your reach than you imagined. The secret lies in immediate rewards and how you position them in relation to the behavior you want to cultivate on your personal growth journey. The human brain, as has already been established, is present-oriented. It prioritizes what generates satisfaction now over what generates results later. So, instead of fighting this tendency, consistent people have learned to use it. They create small, immediate rewards associated with challenging behaviors, making the present experience more appealing than the alternative of avoiding it. A concrete example: if you want to create the habit of working out but haven't yet found pleasure in the exercise itself, allow yourself to listen to your favorite podcast, the one you love, exclusively during your workout. Now your brain begins to associate the gym not only with physical effort, but with an experience it genuinely anticipates. Over time, the boundary between habit and reward begins to dissolve, and the behavior starts to carry its own intrinsic motivation. Associating pleasure with effort is one of the most powerful mental reprogramming tools that exist, and it works because it respects the brain's actual architecture instead of trying to force it to operate in a way it wasn't designed for. The Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius practiced this intuitively 2,000 years ago, recording it in his works Meditations, a book that should be on the shelf of any serious person about inner transformation. The practice of finding meaning and even beauty in the most arduous and challenging tasks of the day. Not because it was easy, but because he had trained his mind to see the value of effort as part of his identity and purpose. This is applied consciousness in its highest form. And what modern neuroscience has confirmed is that this association is not just philosophical, it's physical. It literally reconfigures the neural circuits associated with motivation, pleasure, and self-discipline, creating new pathways that make the desired behavior progressively more natural and less costly. And here's the point that transforms this understanding into real practice. You don't need to wait to like something to start doing it. You need to start doing it to gradually learn to like it. Frequency creates familiarity. Familiarity reduces resistance. Reduced resistance opens space for genuine pleasure to emerge. This is the virtuous cycle that productive people live, and that most observe from the outside without understanding how it was built. But there is an obstacle that appears precisely when this cycle begins to work, an error so common, so human, and so silent that it destroys the progress of almost everyone who gets this far. And it has nothing to do with effort. It has everything to do with where you are focusing your attention. There's a specific moment in almost every person's journey to change their life, a moment that seems harmless, even natural, but which carries within it the seeds of giving up. It's the moment when the focus shifts from the process to the result. It's when you stop asking questions, "What am I doing today?" and begins to ask obsessively, "Why hasn't it arrived yet?" This shift in focus seems rational, after all. Results are the goal, right? But what happens neurologically when you fix your gaze on the destination and lose sight of the path is devastating for your personal growth. The brain interprets the distance between where you are and where you want to be as a threat, as evidence of failure, as proof that the effort isn't paying off. And when the effort seems pointless, self-sabotage finds fertile ground to thrive. The mental clarity that sustains real progress doesn't live in the future, it lives in the present, in the next step, the next action. the next small victory that confirms you're moving in the right direction. But there is a silent partner to excessive focus on results that is even more destructive, and that most people don't even recognize as a problem because it's disguised as a virtue. That partner is called perfectionism. The obsession with perfection is perhaps the greatest killer of potential that exists, precisely because it presents itself as a high standard, as respect for one's own work, as a refusal to accept mediocrity. But what it really does is create such a high bar that any real result seems insufficient, transforming every genuine progress into evidence of inadequacy. The person who will only start meditating when they have the perfect environment will never start. The person who will only post content when it is flawless will never post. The person who will only fully adopt the habit or not abandon it at the first failure. Brené Brown, in her book The Courage to Be Imperfect, essential reading for anyone on this journey of self-discovery, describes perfectionism not as a pursuit of excellence, but as a shield against the vulnerability of being seen trying and failing. And here we arrive at the deepest core of this error, the layer that goes far beyond behavior and touches directly on identity. Because the real problem isn't what you do or don't do, it's what you believe about yourself while you're doing it. When someone says I tried and couldn't keep it up, he is, without realizing it, gathering evidence for an identity narrative that already existed before the attempt. I'm the type of person who gives up. And this narrative is far more powerful than any system, any designed environment, any immediate reward. Because it operates at a deeper level than behavior, it operates at the level of being. James Clear argues that all lasting behavioral change begins with a change in identity, not the other way around. You don't build habits because you have discipline because you've built an identity that includes it. The question then is not, how do I do that? But who do I need to believe I am for this to feel natural to me? And that question, who do I need to believe I am? This is precisely where the deepest inner transformation begins. Not in the gym, not in the habit tracker, not in the meditation app. It begins in a place most people rarely visit with real awareness, the inner space where your self-image lives, where your beliefs about yourself were built, and where they can, with intention, clarity, and the courage to see yourself in a new way, be completely rewritten. And it is precisely about this deeper level of discipline that we need to talk about now. The level that sustains everything. The level that, when activated, makes all other systems, habits, and strategies not only effective, but inevitable.